people are living longer than ever before, but we're not necessarily living healthier longer. We're living with disease, and I want to change that. Hello, and welcome to Healthy Longevity. I'm Dr. Florence Comite, founder of the Comite Center for Precision Medicine and Healthy Longevity in New York City. My mission is to eradicate chronic disease in our lifetime so we can avoid that decline associated with aging that most people think is inevitable, but it's not, and live active, healthy lives for the rest of our lives, be it 100, 120, or 150. Each of us is unique. You're unique, and I'm unique despite having an identical twin sister. Through this podcast, my goal is to share useful information with you that will help you improve your health and increase your health span. I'll also introduce you to forward-thinking experts in the field of healthy aging and longevity, such as today's guest, Dr. Amy Killen, who I'm so excited to chat with. Amy is a longevity and regenerative physician. We first met through Longevity Docs and then got to meet in person in New York City at a longevity mastermind. Amy, Dr. Killen, came to this work with an interesting path. She initially worked as a board-certified emergency physician for more than 7 years. Amy saw the effects of unchecked chronic disease on her patients and decided to transition into anti-aging and longevity medicine. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I was an ER doctor first, so I spent my first 10 years in the emergency department, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, but towards the end of that career, I had 3 kids within 2 years. So I have twins. I know that you're a twin, but I have twins, and then I have another one. And I had them pretty close together. And I was still working a 4 a.m. shift in the ER. So I'm getting up at 3. I'm going to work, super stressful job, not eating well, not sleeping well. My husband had moved out of state for work. And it was just this sort of perfect storm of me starting to kind of fall apart. And I realized one day I was in the ER and I looked out at the people in the waiting room, waiting to be seen, who have all these chronic medical conditions. And I realized that if I didn't get my act together, that I was going to be them in 5 years or 10 years. I was going to be on the other side, with a heart attack or with diabetes or with, any of these chronic diseases that we could probably prevent if we got to them sooner. So that was kind of the turning point for me, realizing I needed to take care of myself in order to take care of my family, and then started learning tools to help other people do the same.
So it seems like your experience as a ER doc inspired you to switch, and I completely identify with that, because in medicine, in reproductive endocrinology, I just saw sick people and I wondered why we had to be sick. And so you got to take care of them and realize that's not what you want for yourself for the future. And if you could change it for yourself, you could change it for thousands of other people.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
what it sounds like.
And I think, the healthcare system is so difficult because, when I was in the ER, I would only have a few minutes with patients. And so I didn't have enough time. I didn't have the tools anyway, but even if I did, I didn't have enough time to really educate them or give them the tools they needed or the resources they needed to make, serious changes. So I'd see the same people over and over again, with the same problems. And it was just, after a few years of that, after 10 years of that, I just realized that there has to be a better way.
Keeping people in the sick disease mode is what conventional medicine does well, because they jump all over it. They can save lives, but why not start before disease and symptoms begin to emerge? That was always my theory. With twins, identical twins, right? You probably see for yourself how identical twins are not quite completely identical. Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so, even when they were really little, even when they're like maybe 1 or 2 years old, they're identical girls. And I would watch them walking from the back away from me. And, one girl had this like swing in her hips and she had this like very like zippy walk. And the other one was more athletic and kind of had this. And it's just interesting, before they even knew that they were 2 different people and that they should act differently and had different interests, there were different people. And so it's very fascinating how genetics works and epigenetics and all the things that play into it.
Right. It's a great example of why I knew, being born an identical twin. Obviously, I didn't choose that. That was my parents and the luck of the genes. And it runs in our family, both identical and fraternal twins. I felt lucky, but it's a completely different experience than being a singleton. But there's so many examples of how we differ. And I'm sure you see all of that. And I was always interested in genetics for that reason. It innately allowed me to understand that people are not alike, that each of us is unique, but the way medicine is practiced, despite epigenetics, is as if it's one size fits all. And we know in the practices we do that that can't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And that's why I started along the path of precision medicine, thinking about data under the surface and how do we figure that out? Because right from the womb, your twins implanted in two different places. And so the way they were fed in utero, which is the way I begin to think about epigenetics, is going to be different.
Yeah.
Is there any specific examples of patients and personal experiences you had in the emergency room that gives you pause now where you realize, oh my God, I wish we had done it differently. I wish I could go back to that time and find whoever it was so that I could change the course of their future health journey?
Oh, there's so many patients. When I think about the first is I had several people over the years, many women especially, who came in with classic hypothyroid symptoms, gaining weight and constipation and dry skin and lack of motivation. They were like at their wits' end, and they would come in, and I'd do a TSH, which is a thyroid test, kind of the classic test. It would be kind of in the normal range, maybe towards the upper end, but normal-ish. And I was always tell them, you're normal, you're fine. And I would send them home. And we know now that like you can very well be in that range, and you could still have serious symptoms and still benefit from treatment. So I just feel bad that I sent all those women home and told them they were fine. And then now, they probably really could have used some help.
That's a fantastic example. You probably did it the way most physicians do it. I would say over 90% of physicians, because you have this range for TSH that goes from 0.4 to 4.5, or it can even be lower than 0.4, but let's just use that. It's a 10-fold difference. And yet thyroid function could be anywhere. It could be super high, super low. It doesn't even matter what TSH is. As people age, there's a disconnect between stimulating the thyroid and being able to make thyroid hormone, or a disconnect too between the T4, free T4 and free T3, so that a lot of people are fine when it comes to their T4, but their T3 is way too low. And many doctors don't know that. If you do a TSH and it's within that broad range, don't look any further. And
Right.
yet the body is a system where it engages up and down, and we're ignoring the system. We're looking at one little piece of it without understanding the relationship.
Yeah, and
That's a
beyond
great
that,
example.
there's also even people who have normal free T3s, but they have resistance, at the receptors are kind of resistant to the T3. So for instance, in polycystic ovarian syndrome, a lot of times we'll see, relatively normal TSH, relatively normal free T3, free T4, and yet they have a lot of classic thyroid symptoms. And if you give them thyroid, those symptoms improve. So there's multiple layers of complexity. And I think that, and you and I have discussed this, but with hormones, we can check a hormone level of any of these hormones, but that's only telling us one little piece of the puzzle. It's telling us what the level is right now in the blood when you check it. And it's not telling us anything else like downstream effects. It's not telling us the cell receptor effects. It's not telling us how the cell interprets those receptor effects. Like it's all these layers that we have no way of measuring right now.
Exactly, except by intuiting based on expertise and training and learning over time that there's something missing. And how do we get to that? How do we get to the etiology of what is going on in that singular human being? And I find that the most fun, but also the most challenging. And I
Yeah.
think there's not enough time in the healthcare system to do it any better, because you may have a few minutes, but even internal medicine physicians who are supposed to be adult specialists, it's been said they have 8 minutes a year for you if you come in for your annual. How do you dig into a human story to figure out how you can make a difference?
Yeah.
And that's a big question.
And I think part of that, when you talk about the story is actually very important. Like a lot of times your patient will tell you what's wrong with them if you listen
Right.
long enough. If you just sit
Exactly.
and let them talk for 15 or 20 minutes and tell you everything that's going on, you can oftentimes find out the diagnosis without even necessarily doing a whole bunch of tests, because their story tells you so much. And I think that we've lost that. We don't do a good physical exam anymore, most of us, and we don't listen to their story. And those are two big key pieces of understanding what's going on with people.
Yes, I agree. I think while telemedicine has a lot of benefit, I think the lack of the hands-on, as well as maybe the inability to diverge and kind of ask questions that may take you more time, is hard to do. We've always had a policy here of gathering the health story. I've never liked the notion of a chief complaint. Yes, somebody can have a chief complaint, but it doesn't tell you how they eat, how they sleep, how they work out, or if they don't, what the stresses are in their life. And so we actually technically call it the health story, and we marry that health story with data. That's where the precision comes from, in order to figure out what makes you you and how do we change your future health trajectory so chronic disease isn't inevitable. And that's what we see in our scientific data. And I love that term, health story. That's what we use. Speaking of terms, you were the first clinician I ever ran into to start using N of 1 as a clinical kind of moniker. And I remember being fascinated because no one had ever used it. When I used it, people would look at me like I had 3 heads. And so I am intrigued by how you came to that and what that means to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because I was so excited about it.
Yeah. I think N of one just means it's what's happening with you personally. And it obviously everyone's most interested in what's happening with them personally and not what's happening to everyone else. And so this term has been kind of around for a long time. But what's interesting now is we're starting to have the technology available to take all of this N of one data from all these different people and then put it together and then start learning from it in a way that we've never really been done before. So with, the advent of AI and some of these advanced technologies, we can start to do that. I'm involved with a really cool app called N of one Plus, or Reputable is kind of the company, and that's exactly what it's doing. Essentially, it's letting you do kind of like self experiments, like wellness products, supplements, changes in your diet, changes in your sleep patterns, and it's looking at it takes all of your data and can start to look and see, hey, when you take this supplement, your REM sleep is improved by 20%. Whereas if you don't go for a walk after lunch, then your fatigue scores get worse or whatever. And so you have this N of one data, but then over time you can start to bring together populations of N of one data and start to say things like, hey, what are other 45-year-old women who have young kids find helpful for sleeping? Like, you can kind of narrow down very specifically on these kinds of things. So I'm super excited about this idea of N of one becoming, N of many, but still very personalized.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's how the premise of what I started Comite Center, that we designed protocols in a forward-looking way to be able to distinguish profiling people. And the data is so vast that being able to look at all these omics, whether it's your metabolism or the protein or your genetics, which to me is the basis of all findings, really. So the big data is important. And actually, NIH started their Join All of Us, where they're looking at 1 million lives to try to derive sense from how do you apply it. I think without drilling down into the particulars about an individual, it's hard to do that. So I think of it in my brain as little big data.
I love that.
Like, we're getting the big data, but we need to marry it to who those human beings are. And there's plenty of examples of that along the years. Great. So I'd like to switch the topics a little to Humanot Health. Where did the idea come from? Have you launched any longevity clinics yet? And then how do you find clinicians and physicians, and who vets them? Like, how are you going to make this work? Because we both know that this is a steep learning curve, and it doesn't exist in conventional, or I think even in functional medicine. Yeah. I'm not a functional medicine doctor, but I've been to plenty of meetings. It's still completely unique in those settings. It's really not fully grown yet, where somebody can go somewhere and get trained in it.
Yeah, so you're right. Those are great questions. So it's been about a year. I was approached by Jim Donnelly. Jim was the CEO of Restore Hyper Wellness. He was the co-founder and CEO, which is a clinic. They have like wellness clinics, red light therapy, cryotherapy, things like that, all over the country, 250 plus stores. And so he had started that and had left about a year ago, and he wanted to do a higher level clinic, more more medical. So he approached me and Dr. Harry Adelson, one of my colleagues, to see if we were interested in joining him in this endeavor. And we were, for me, it was like kind of everything that I've been wanting to do, combined over the years. Like, I have a clinic here in Utah that does a lot of hormones and a little bit of integrative medicine. I do stem cell medicine as well in a different clinic. I have a supplement company that's longevity focused, but it's kind of like, how can we take, all of these things and put them together? And the key is we really want to be able to offer this kind of advanced level care to more people versus just offering it to the super rich. Because right now there are longevity clinics out there, but your people are paying $100,000 a year to get these advanced diagnostics and to have someone to help them interpret it and, give them hormones and peptides and different therapies. But that seems a little steep for the average person. And so we want to make this more available to more people by developing scalable, I wouldn't say necessarily protocols, but at least algorithms for how do we look at different pieces of information and then build out, a personalized program for each person, but in a way that's scalable. That's my job as chief medical officer, is to develop a lot of these algorithms. And so for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on that and will continue to do so. But you're right, it is very difficult to take something that's so precision and then try to scale it and make it more available to more people.
It is, because back when I started this work over 20 years ago, actually probably now closer to 30, I wanted the bricks and the clicks. So I knew that if it worked, I had to test the model. And it's not unusual, actually, when you bring new models to the market, that it's only the wealthy that could really afford it, because healthcare is not going to pay for you to do anything if they don't perceive it as a necessity or that you're sick, because that's what conventional healthcare is, right?
Right.
But, and now we're in that phase, and maybe there'll be synergies between us, because the app that we brought to fruition is now being offered. And I see a future where completely virtual medicine is possible, as long as there are answers that the doctors can use, the clinicians can use to help behind the scenes. So as AI and generative AI becomes a reality, we have the backbones of that. And so doctors and physicians who want to be able to screen and offer solutions without having to either do telemedicine or see people in person, but really help thousands of people. And since there are only a few of us, I think it made sense to start.
I would love that. Yeah,
so
I would
love your
that.
idea. And
That I think I've been hearing about your app, and it sounds amazing. So I would love to talk more about that for sure, because there's so much
do that.
overlap between us.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I said I haven't heard any clinician of your ilk talking about N of 1. And I think you call it N of 1 plus, which is a little extra hit.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you already addressed a question. I don't know if you want to add something. Is why do you think there's so much interest today in improving health span and longevity by both the public, with all this fascination with Peter Attia and Brian Johnson and Huberman and you name it, Mark Hyman's another one, and also the public? Where's that coming from?
I think it's a great question, because, people for, hundreds of years have wanted to live longer. It's this idea that they want to live longer and not die is obviously not a new idea. Brian Johnson did not coin the term "don't die." He says it a lot, but that's something we've wanted to do forever. I think that there's the interest now because we do have some technologies and therapies and things on the horizon that look promising. When by horizon, I mean more like 5 or 10 years probably, but that look promising for at least being able to slow how quickly we're aging. I don't know that we have a lot for reversing aging yet, but I do think that there's at least research in animals that are, is promising for some of these things. And so I think that's what it is. I think people are just saying, because of AI and all of these things coming together, and nanotech and robotics and all these different things coming together, I think that there's actually a promise of potentially being able to live longer, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah. And that's why in the opening, there's so many centenarians now living longer lives that, it's amazing to me, but they're not necessarily healthy. Where do you think it's going to end? Like, if your best guess now, what do you think age? Are you a believer that if we're happy, we get to 100, or do you see a future where maybe it's 150?
I definitely think 150 is possible, but I still think it'll be a few decades before that's possible. But I think that, like for me personally, I would love to get to be 100 and healthy at 100. Now, great. If I can go longer than that, that's great. But, my grandmother just died and she was 102. So I do have some good genes behind me, but I think my kids definitely have the chance to be living to be, maybe 120 or even longer. Once we figure out some of the things that can be changed, and it's not going to be one thing, right? It's not going to be one gene. It's not going to be one medication. It's not going to be one anything. But when we figure out what the combination of things that we need to put together are, I do think that we'll make pretty rapid strides. But in the meantime, we know a lot about how to prevent chronic diseases, the ones that kill us, which, heart disease, cancer, dementia are at the top 3, I think. So we know a lot about how to prevent those things. So in the meantime, why don't we work towards preventing those as a way of living longer, even if we're not actually preventing aging.
That's a great answer, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts for you. How did you end up changing your journey in terms of the choices you make about your habits, your sleep, exercise, restorative practices? You would like to stop disease instead of continuing to manage it.
Yeah. I've always exercised. I was an athlete in high school, and I've always had that as a part of my life. For some reason, I thought that that was enough. Like I could just exercise and I'd be healthy. What I learned as an ER doctor and then new mother of twins and another one was the importance of sleep. That was something that I was missing for, a good 10 years in my life, especially those last few years. And when I quit the ER and I started sleeping again, 8 hours at a night, I was waking up rested. And that actually is the thing that moved the needle more than anything else for me. Because when I woke up rested, I was more likely to then go exercise and also to make better food choices and also to take time for myself and not yell at my kids. And so that's the thing I tell people, you can be doing everything else right. But if you're not sleeping well and you're not well rested, then you're not going to be able to be as healthy as you want to be.
I love it. Years ago, it used to be exercise, food, sleep. And I quickly flipped it, finding so many tools now, because I think the other reason that's driving the system are all the wearables and tools, and ultimately probably an inserted chip that will tell us how you're actually living life so we can make micro adjustments, right? But sleep is paramount. And if people ask me what's the one thing they should take a deep look at, and what I have found, I don't know if you've seen this too, but I monitor people with Aura rings, and we're working with the company as well. And it's clear to me when you have quality deep sleep, you can achieve a lot. I mean, REM is important and other aspects of sleep is important too. But there's some people who sleep 9 hours and have 9 minutes of deep sleep and they just don't feel well. They wake up with no energy. And so that's the biggest difference I've seen as well. As you mentioned too, the thyroid affects the brain, cognition, memory, the heart, rhythm, muscle, joints, bone, and people don't get that connection, because we're also, another issue I think in conventional medicine is the fact that we're so siloed. We're in our own spaces, and unless you go out of your way to perform and have a team around a particular individual, you need that expertise, but you need to be exchanging ideas and growing, I think.
Yeah.
So great. I'm so glad you're getting more sleep. Did you find, because I find this as well in a number of our clients and patients, that when they start catching up with sleep for whatever reason, they're actually more tired to begin with. And that's a finding that I've heard neurologists explain, but I don't quite know how and why, but I see it very often.
I'm not
At
seeing
first they're
that. That's
exhausted. It
interesting.
takes a while.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have that for me. For me, it was once I could start sleeping, I was a lot better. I remember when
So
I
you didn't
had
have
my
to catch up from the 8-10 years of,
yeah,
actually, since
exactly.
your twins are
They're
16
16
and it was
now.
7 years ago. Yeah. So you quit when they were about 8 or 9,
I
and you didn't have,
I was at 2013 is when I quit. So I've been out for 10 years.
okay,
Yeah.
a little bit more.
I remember
Okay.
when
I
I
thought
was
we said
when
7.
the twins were little, they were like, maybe they were a month old. I just had them. I was, barely, I had a C-section. So I was like kind of recovering from that, but I was super stressed out and decided that I needed to be going back to the gym because, I didn't feel good about myself and I wasn't sleep and I was back to work. Anyway, I went to Gold's Gym and I got a personal trainer, and this woman, Marie, and I started training with her. And I remember one day I came to the gym and Marie was like, Amy, you look exhausted. Like, why are you here? Why are you not at home sleeping? And I said, well, I only have a little bit of time and I can either work out or I can sleep, but I can't do both. And she said, well, yeah, you need to sleep. Like, don't come back to me until you're sleeping, because nothing that we do in the gym is going to be beneficial to you if you're not getting sleep. And I thought that was so smart. And, she's making money off of me if I'm there, but she knew that if I wasn't sleeping, I couldn't build muscle. I couldn't do anything else, that sleep comes first.
She's not wrong. And in fact, I don't know if you recall this, but a few years ago, they came out with this line that sitting is the new smoking, which really irritated me because I don't think that sitting is actually the new smoking.
Yeah.
And that's a different issue. Maybe they were trying to sell more desk treadmills and desks that go up and down, But I came up with, when someone asked me on a show once, I came up with, no, sleep is the new exercise, because I feel exactly the same way. And I tell our patients that, if they're running around like crazy and they're traveling and they're trying to catch up and they're trying to work out 3 or 4 times a week, they need to sleep before they catch up with exercise. That will come next. And that's why I put it at the end of it, because I do think sleep trumps almost everything else for most people. Like if you can get good sleep, nutrition is a fair, pretty close second. I think the exercise, I almost think restorative work is even more important. What do you think is the most important message that your population may not be getting from their clinicians and physicians and whoever takes care of them in the US and even in the world? If you could pinpoint something besides sleep, maybe, which you already articulated.
I mean, I think that the message, the main message just needs to be that you're in control of your own health, that your doctor is really not in control of it. Your doctor who sees you for 8 minutes a year and, just hands you some medications, not because they're bad doctors, but that's all they can do with the care system that we have. But no one else is going to be able to make you better or make you sicker than you. And so, it's a big responsibility, but nobody else can take that on. Your parents can't, your spouse can't, your kids can't, and your doctor can't. So for better or worse, it's up to you.
Totally. Listen, your answers are so resonating with me. I think of it as a partnership over the years, that we don't go home with you. We're not sitting with you, but we can give you guidance. And that's where the app came from. If you can get guidance 24/7 and ask questions and then be managed that way, it's more than just prescribing drugs over, the internet, which I have some difficulty with, particularly if there's a lot of sales rep in it, not real clinicians. And that's going to change, I hope. That I totally think that's the most important. Like, we own our own future, and our genes don't have to be destiny, actually, if we understand what's going on and what we could do to avert it. There's plenty going on in today's world that gives us tools to keep our health, but we have to be made aware of it.
Yeah.
So awareness and owning the responsibility is really important.
Yeah. Yep. Agree.
I'd love to learn more now, turning to what's critical about your longevity practice and your full body stem cell makeover. It sounds quite exciting. I might sign up myself. What exactly is involved in that procedure?
So the full body stem cell makeover is myself and Dr. Harry Adelson here in Park City, Utah. And we've been working together for about 10 years doing stem cell procedures. I say that I do skin and sex. So I do, skin rejuvenation, hair restoration, and sexual optimization. And then Dr. Adelson does the musculoskeletal injection. So he does, major joints as well as all down the neck and the back. And so we were doing just kind of spotty procedures here and there, but we started having a lot of these, we had a lot of Canadian cowboys who had had multiple joints with arthritis, and their back was hurting all the way down, and all these things were going on. And they would ask us, can you just inject all of the joints in my body? Can you just do it all at once versus like just my shoulder or just my knee? Because everything's hurting. And we had a lot of biohackers as well that would come in, Dave Asprey and Ben Greenfield and those guys. And anyway, so we started doing this procedure where we put you to sleep with an anesthesiologist, and Dr. Adelson basically injects all the major joints: shoulders, elbows, wrists, knees, hips, ankles, as well as all down the back and neck. And at the same time, I do the scalp, the face, the neck, and then the sexual organs. And then we do some IV as well. So it's kind of like a combination of multiple injections, but you're asleep and you wake up, an hour or so later, and people love it because, as you know, like when like if you have shoulder pain, it doesn't just affect your shoulder; it's also going to affect your elbow and your wrist and maybe your back and your neck. Like, everything's connected. And so we just found that when we inject a bunch of different things at once, people tend to have better results than just doing one thing at a time. So people travel in now from all over the world to do it. It's a big procedure. It's an expensive procedure. It's not for everyone. But we have a lot of fun doing it. And it's kind of my part-time job, but I really like it.
That sounds great. Are you getting stem cells from the individual, or do you have a source of stem cells that you're able to use and for anybody?
Yeah, we have a couple of different options. We've done autologous stem cells where we get them from the individual, bone marrow aspirations or little mini liposections. And then we also do placental cells as well with like Wharton's jelly and extracellular vesicles. Kind of depends on what the person wants, but we've been leaning more into the placental cells just because it's a lot less invasive for the patient, and people tend to have better results, especially people who are over the age of 40 or so.
That sounds fabulous. Do you mind sharing what the cost is, or is that something it's individualized?
No, the cost is $85,000. So it is not inexpensive. The problem is all of these. I mean, it's expensive for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that that these placental cells, we're using a lot of cells and a lot of Wharton's jelly and vesicles, and these products are, in order to get really good products from a good lab, they are expensive. But we want to, we obviously don't want to give you products from a bad lab that are not going to be well vetted and all of that. So it's one of those things that some people can afford it, most can't. But that's another reason for human. With Humanot, we're going to be doing regenerative cell therapy injections as well. But the idea with that is, how can we make this more affordable to more people? So it's not $85,000, but it's something that you want to come in and get your knee done, or your hip done, or things like that. But because we're going to be franchising this, and we're going to be working out deals with the labs and things, we'll be able to get the products for less, and then we'll be able to offer the services for less. So we're all about trying to make these things more available to more people.
All right. Let me see a couple more, and then I think we probably need to wrap up. But anything surprised you in the field of longevity medicine in the past couple of years?
I mean, I'm surprised a little bit by, like, for instance, like Brian Johnson and all the things that he's doing is a little bit surprising. What's surprising about it is that he has gotten so much attention for doing things that, a lot of us have been talking about for, 10 years, like, whether it's supplements or procedures or ideas that, that your erectile function is a good indicator of cardiovascular health. And I love that he's getting the word out there. So it's kind of fun to see some of these things that we've been talking about become more mainstream. Brian he's a quirky guy, and I don't know him personally, but he's interesting in that way. And other people like that are getting the word out that there's cool stuff that we are looking at. I think I've been a little bit surprised by that, but also I'm excited by it.
Yeah, I think it's converging the whole field. So completely agree. The area that I think you and I have a lot of interest in, and it's quite exciting, is the fact that there's all these recent new studies showing a spotlight on hormonal treatment and all the misinformation, because it's still so confusing. I can say, because I've been in the field probably twice, close to 3 times as long as you, that I was a strong voice against the Women's Health Initiative outcomes. And I continue to do and create protocols at Yale and beyond, treating women with testosterone, even if they had breast cancer, or blocking it, with an inhibitor, because they didn't want to live life anymore if estrogen was completely out of their system. And so you must be excited about that, the new way that hopefully will permeate both clinicians and the public about what goes on in the hormone field.
Yeah,
now.
I'm so excited. And you've been in it longer than I have. I've only been doing about 10 years. I've been involved in hormones. And you especially, kind of early people saying, actually hormones they're not bad if you do them correctly. They're very helpful if you need them. But there were just so many doctors after the WHI that were scared, and then they came out, vehemently opposed to all of these things, and scared so many women. And it's still, 20 years later from that study, you still have so many doctors, and of course so many patients, that just don't understand. They still think that, estrogen is going to give you breast cancer, that estrogen is going to give you heart attacks and strokes and dementia and, all of these things. But it's such a nuance. Like there's a lot of differences, obviously, between the synthetic versions of these hormones and the bio or body identical versions of these hormones. And I think that one of the big problems with even the traditional menopause organizations that are out there is that it wasn't until the last couple of years that they even differentiated these 2 types of hormones. Like, they considered them all to be the same, and they lumped them together, and they said, they took all the data and said, okay, well, this big lump does this, or this big lump does that, but they didn't parcel out, again, it wasn't precision medicine. It was this like conglomerate of things medicine. So I think that some of the major organizations, the menopause organizations, things like that, are finally starting to look and say, oh, wait, these doctors who have been talking about bioidentical hormones, who we called crazy, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and we called them, nutcases, like they actually, they may have known what they're talking about, which is hilarious.
Totally agreed. I think there's a quote when the trial came out, and then I still see people taking like Premarin and Provera, which I stopped immediately when I started women's health at Yale in 1992. Anybody come in with that? No. And in fact, Wyeth had given me a grant, and I still told them I'm not going to be using Premarin. So there was a lot of misinformation, and women were crying. It was really awful. Sure. So I'm thrilled, as you are. I know we have a little bit of a different approach to it, and I'm curious about using estrogen as a pill as opposed to a cream, but confused too about the fact that women go through perimenopause and menopause and they become hyperlipidemic. Their cholesterol shoots up. Even women who've been told their whole lives, oh, your cholesterol is beautiful, don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an intriguing concept that I haven't seen much data on. I don't know if you have some or other people have published in that arena.
Yeah, there's definitely data that oral estradiol improves, LDL, ApoB, even Lp(a), which is genetic and thought to be very difficult to improve. Oral estradiol can reduce Lp(a) by as much as I've seen 20 or 30% in some studies.
Wow.
And then it also can increase HDL. It doesn't seem to have as much of an effect on triglycerides, but versus transdermal. Transdermal estradiol is, it's very, very safe, and I don't have any problems with it in terms of, there's really no knock. It doesn't cause blood clots. It doesn't cause anything really bad. But transdermal doesn't have as much benefit on the lipids. So it's one of those things you kind of have to weigh. And then I think that there's evidence that the oral estradiols are better at preventing cardiovascular plaque accumulation. We have a couple of studies, like the ELITE study, for instance, was one of them. The DOPS, the Danish osteoporosis study, was another one. There's been a couple that have shown that they took oral estradiol and they were able to slow plaque progression. And the few studies that I've seen that had looked at transdermal didn't show that. Now, I don't know if it's a dosing situation where maybe they just didn't have a high enough dose of transdermal, or maybe it just wasn't done in enough people. But for those reasons, I tend to like the oral estradiol. But I think that every person is different. If you have a high risk of blood clots, or you've been off of hormones for more than 10 years, from menopause onset, and you're at risk for plaque rupture, I think transdermal is probably safer to start with. But in people who have high lipids, and that's a big problem, I think that oral is probably a better option.
Got it. But the last question that I like to ask everybody is, if someone just stopped you on the street, I'm sure that happens, or anywhere, and they find out what you do, what is the one tip you can give them? What if they say, how do I protect my health? What would you tell me to do?
I would tell them to sleep more and make sure they get at least 20 minutes of exercise every day.
Amy, this has been fantastic. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add besides that, but feel free.
No, thank you so much. I'm very active on Instagram, Dr. Amy B. Killen, if you want to follow along. I do have a website, dramykillen.com, and I have kind of links to some of the different projects I'm doing and clinics and various things that I have that I'm working on. So come find me. And
so that's all on your website.
That's on my website.
So if somebody wants to find you, it's at
dramykillen.com
on social media.
Dr. Amy B. Killen is Instagram, and then Dr. Amy Killen is at my website.
Okay, great. Well, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. Again, I don't think there's one answer you gave that we haven't resonated on completely.
Awesome.
So I'm excited to learn more. Maybe I can even visit your center, and if I'm up for regenerative treatment,
absolutely,
we could talk about
Sounds
that.
good. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for joining us, and good luck on all your ventures.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.